published 17:30 Eastern Daylight Saving Time, the 11th of May 2018, updated 1955 Eastern Daylight Saving Time, the 11th of May 2018. A few weeks ago, John Motson found himself in Arsene Wenger's company after a game at the Emirates Stadium. He asked me why on earth I was retiring, laughed Motson this week. I should have asked him the same question really, shouldn't I? Motson, the country's most revered and well-known sports commentator, is not really retiring, but he is leaving the BBC after 50 years. Gone, then, but not forgotten. John Motson is hanging up his mic and has some incredible stories from his career. On Sunday, he will commentate on his final game for Match of the Day at Crystal Palace vs West Brom. Since he started on television for the BBC at a Liverpool vs Chelsea game in October 1971, he has sat on the gantry more than 2,500 times. David E. Coleman said to me that the first requirement was survival, Motson said. There you can try and improve. Motson certainly improved. For millions of football supporters, the 72-year-old has formed the soundtrack to their sporting lives. In the days before satellite television, Motson's recognizable voice and unique style of information-heavy commentary provided a window through which we watched and listened to the action. Motson has been equally proficient on TV and radio and, along with Coleman, Harry Carpenter, Barry Davies and Dale Lynam, was part of broadcasting royalty. As he prepares to close the chapter on that part of his life, he is being treated as such. Most clubs have said I am welcome to come back anytime, he said. I hope they mean it. Everyone has been very lovely. I can't understand all the fuss really. Motson has commentated next to many famous names during 5 decades at the BBC. Muhammad Ali left him on his own to climb into the ring after a Joe Bugner fight in 1974. Bobby Charlton cried after seeing Paolo Rossi's Italy dump Brazil out of the 1982 World Cup, while Jack Nicholson Gate crashed his commentary booth at Wimbledon in 1981. At Chelsea's Stamford Bridge 4 years ago, he sat next to the man who saved his life. I had an operation for bowel cancer in 2014, revealed Motson. I missed a few games but not many, 5 I think. My target was to get back working as quickly as possible. My surgeon said he would like to come and sit next to me for a commentary, and it was one of those hairy afternoons when things went awry with the equipment. Legendary broadcaster has covered 10 World Cups and 10 European Championships. As I drove him home, he commented on the stress, but it's hardly saving lives, is it? Having the illness maybe should have changed me, but it didn't really. I can't help being on a knife edge when I'm working. I developed a reputation over the years for being pedantic, but that's because I was wanting to get the best out of myself. When I did the 2006 World Cup quarterfinal, 23 million people watched it live. One faux pas and you are in trouble. A natural socializer, Motson has a contacts book to rival anyone. First and foremost, he has always been a serious journalist, something he attributes to his early years on provincial newspapers. He used to get desperately nervous but recalled, Rod Stewart asked me to bring a commentator's team to Chigwell to play on his pitch in his garden. Rod was seriously good and should have been a pro. He never gave the ball away for 20 minutes. Motson knows he is pedantic about his work but insists it is to get the best out of himself anywhere. He took us to his local pub and I asked him if he got nerves on stage. He said, "Why should I be nervous? Singing is what I do." I had been wound up about a few games, and that gave me the impetus to cool off and realize that I was just doing a basic broadcasting job. Motson's Ali moment came in 1974, a time when he was keen to keep his sporting options open. Commentating on a Bugner fight at the Albert Hall, everything went well until the time came for Ali to sum up. I handed the mic to him on my left and he just wasn't there, smiled Motson. My co-commentator had disappeared. He was in the ring trying to box Bugner. 7 years later, in 1981, Motson was on an outside court at Wimbledon for BBC Radio. He worked on all of Bjorn Borg's 5 triumphs. There was a scuffle downstairs and this big man strode up, and it was Jack Nicholson, the actor, he said. He sat down and grabbed the mic. The producer told me to get him on air, so I interviewed him, and he was brilliant on tennis, his latest film and his life. It was going well until the producer said, "John, you are watching a tennis match. Could you give the score?" That was when Jack, with the cans on, looked at me and said in his best The Shining voice, "Just give him the score, Johnny." Quote, Dale Lynam never forgot that. Everywhere we went he would tell that story. Muhammad Ali commentated alongside Motson but ended up storming the ring, as well as 29 FA Cup finals and 5 replays. Motson commentated live on 10 World Cups and 6 World Cup finals. He worked with Sir Bobby Charlton in Barcelona in 1982 when the Brazil of Vida, Socrates, Zico and Falcao lost to Italy. I gave Bobby the mic at the end and there were tears running down his face. He recalled, he loved the Brazilians, and the realization at the end was that they were out with a team that could have rivaled 1970. Somebody in London was in my ear saying we had to wrap this up and get to the news. I was thinking, this is the F*** news. We may have lost John Motson to newspapers before we even knew him. That we didn't was unwittingly down to a sub-editor on the old Sheffield Morning Telegraph called Benny Hill. In the late 1960s, local BBC radio was in its infancy, and in Sheffield the early broadcasts relied heavily on local newspapermen for football bulletins and updates. Motson, in his early 20s, had reported on air about a game at Barnsley. I was back in the Telegraph office and could see the sub-editor looking at my written report over the top of his half-moon glasses, said Motson. He really was called Benny Hill. He screwed up his nose, looked at me and said, "If this is the standard of your writing, maybe broadcast is the world for you." Soon enough, a career that Motson hoped would take him to a national newspaper had been diverted to the BBC. The veteran broadcaster's voice is instantly recognizable when tuning into a game. Radio was his home in 1968 before he was picked up by Match of the Day in the early 1970s. I had started on the Barnet Free Press and court cases, council meetings, traffic reports, weddings, obituaries, Motson explained. It helped me a little bit years later when I was present at the Hillsborough disaster. Motson, low down the list at the BBC behind Davis and Coleman, got his break when Ronnie Radford scored for non-league Hereford to knock Newcastle out of the FA Cup in 1972. Ronnie launched my career, laughed Motson. The BBC trusted me to cover a big match after that. As his stock grew, Motson was always much more than a man telling viewers about headers and volleys. A hard-nosed approach to his career ensured he was never stared down by the big names of the day. Ramsey, Clough, Ferguson. They all tried. I was in awe of the managers at first, but I thought I would get a better answer if I asked a braver question. He said, "I like Clough. A producer said that I should just ask him to read the telephone directory and people would tune in. I actually used to ring Peter Taylor for information more. He'd say, "Don't tell Brian we spoke." Back then, before the advent of regular live football, Motson would spend his weeknights driving to matches, making contacts. The tea room was his favorite hangout. I would bump into managers, scouts and injured players, he said. It could be the same on match day. Once I had a sore throat, so the Southampton physio gave me something to gargle. Charlie George was on the table laughing. Some of the overseas managers don't know who I am, which I fully understand. It was different then. Sometimes, it took a little more work and planning to get to know the people you needed to know. In 1980, Liverpool were playing Aberdeen in the European Cup and the Scots were managed by a man called Alex Ferguson. Motson said, "I got his number and called him and explained who I was. He came to my hotel and gave me a rundown on the team and invited me to training. When he came to Manchester United, that relationship was valuable." Motson has worked tirelessly to improve his craft over decades in the commentary box. You remember his haircut and how smart, energetic and enthusiastic he was. Alex had his ups and downs with the BBC, but once he gave me the team on the Friday before an FA Cup final. It was before he had told the players. Anyone who gave me a team knew that I would not mention it until 3 p.m. on a Saturday. I would have been dead if I had. If someone trusts you, then you cannot blow that. Motson's stock was high in the 1980s and 1990s, but while having a drink with Terry Venables in a New York bar during the 1994 World Cup, he took a phone call to tell him the final was being handed to Davies. His friend and rival was subsequently given the next 2 FA Cup finals too. "Barry deserved it, but I knew I had to fight back," he said. "I was like a golfer who needed to adjust my swing. I needed to sharpen my act up, improve my commentary and prove I was still the best." ITV then offered me Brian Moore's job as he was retiring. Before I knew it, I was back in the FA Cup commentary box for the BBC. "Barry and I always got on. He is a good human being, but I could look after myself. At the BBC I had to. It was a very hostile environment in the early days. Things were said and done that today would take people to human resources in 2 minutes. The language and abuse, you felt that if you dropped a clanger you might be out of work. I would have sleepless nights sweating on getting it right. There were recriminations if something went wrong, naked fury. I will leave that there." Motson still wants to work despite calling time on his commentary career with the BBC. Over lunch with Motson in London this week, he considers his 2 favourite teams to watch. Patriotically he chooses Sir Bobby Robson's England team of Italia '90 and Sven-Goran Eriksson's class of 2006. Had Wayne Rooney and Michael Owen not got injured, Sven could have won the 2006 World Cup, he said. "But I think Bobby's team would have beaten them, because of Gaza." Motson was fond of Eriksson and the feeling may be mutual. One time the Swede crept up behind Motson and whispered one of his most recognizable commentary lines in his ear. He said, "It just gets better and better and better," recalled Motson. "It was the line I used as Sven's England beat Germany 5-1 in Munich." It was nice that he remembered. As he looks ahead to a new life and new work, Motson feels he is leaving the BBC at the right time. He may be avuncular and decent, but Motson is nobody's fool. He has a firm view of what TV football should look and sound like. Alan Shearer has become the new Alan Hansen, he said. He has improved so much. I think Glenn Hoddle is good on ITV, and I like Martin Keown because he says what he thinks. That criticism of Mesut Ozil recently was the bravest thing I have seen on BBC Sport for a while. Mark Lawrenson was good for me. He calmed me down a bit with his one-liners. I want the ex-players to tell us how to do it and what it feels like to be there. I don't agree that Sky have raised the bar. The BBC have been the market leader. We were there first. The difference is that Gary Neville has more than an hour to explain stuff. On Match of the Day they have a minute and a half between games. The 72-year-old says he will still be at football matches on most Saturday afternoons. The matches will go on, of course, just without Motson. He is not particularly sad. He is ready and his legacy is secure. He reveals, for example, that when the BBC needed a name for the Saturday lunch programme in the 1970s, Motson came up with one. Football Focus. He will not miss the preparation, and neither will his wife Anne. She has kept his match record diligently in black books for 35 years. And he will not miss the football, as he will still be going. If I am not at a game most Saturdays I will be surprised, he said. And I still have my voice. So if I can find another way of using it, speaking of voiceovers, then I'm available. I certainly am not going to sit and stare at a blank wall. I will keep my eyes and ears open and see if anybody wants me. Botty Night, a special night of programming dedicated to John Motson, airs May 19th on BBC Two. Motson is not sad about his departure and knows he is ready and his legacy is secure.